Oh, hello. Couple of days away, I think, doing things. I'm back with phone going off over there. Kevin's Fender made in Mexico Stratocaster, and this is it's a nice guitar, and it's always had a problem. And Kev brought it over the other day, and the first thing we ascertained was that there was a problem with the jack, and that somehow I think the hole is a little bit small here. So what had happened is that well, we're going to change it, so we might as well have a quick look. What had happened was the jack tip had somehow bent under when closing the thingy, and it had, well, basically pushed out completely, pushed in completely. So when the thing was pushing it in, it was capturing the socket. Anyway, well, we're kind of there, so why don't we start with that? So I was interested in knowing whether that was something to do with the maybe a lack of space in the hole, because it seemed a bit on the thin side or a narrow, tight side when I put this back in. So what we're going to do, we're going to get rid of this little socket because it's already been bent out of shape, completely out of shape. It was so far bent out of shape that after that point the jack wouldn't go in anymore, so the guitar was useless. So kind of fixed it temporarily, but since it's an old socket and it's already been bent well out of shape, I figured we might as well replace it with a slightly better quality one, which is one of these new trick ones here that I always use. And then the solder joint, it looks like it's been soldered twice, so there's something else has come off this. I don't know, it doesn't look very factory. So what I'm going to do is fit this new one. I suppose I'll put the soldering iron on while I'm at it. Fit the new one, and then we'll just make sure it all works. I'll put a little bit of shrink wrap on there to shrink tubing. If I can find where I've put it. Solder, please. Grabbing things. Desolderer, probably not needed. So somewhere, there's the shrink tubes. Sorry, so I didn't really plan to get straight into this, but since I was here discussing that, it probably makes more sense that we just do that bit up front. So soldering iron heating up. We'll get the shrink tubing. Apart from that, so it's got the jack issue it was nice to be able to diagnose that straight away. So I have that sorted out. Then the next issue I came across was the saddles were sticking way up, and actually the length of the grub screws was sticking in Kev's hand. So he asked, could I do anything about that? So what I did is I bought a set of lower ones, which is great. So that's taken care of that. Having lowered the action now, I noticed some pinging in the nut, and having lowered the action, I noticed there's choke out. We'll see that in a little bit on quite a lot of the strings. So to make this the best it can be, it's my duty to replace the nut with a good quality Tusk PQ 5000 nut, and let's just get this undone. Yeah, we'll get excuse me, we'll get the nut replaced and the first fret action set nice and low. So this is strange. This has definitely got some original or some leftover pre-existing bits of wire stuck to it. That's weird. So what I'll do now is I'll just cut this back to a neat end, I think. Let's have a look at the. It should really probably end up being the same length. There's no reason for them to be different. So I just get a bit of clean. Oh, my thumbnails ain't doing what they're supposed to do. So here we are, we've just passed the halfway point of the year, 2024, halfway gone. Well, in terms of the summer, we're on the run, slow, suddenly very quick rundown to the dark nights, you know, that stuff, shorter days and all that. So we're already there, and it's been a very odd spring stroke summer. If you listen to the this will spark a load of critics, but if you listen to people talking, it's the warmest weather ever, and yet I've experienced it in the UK as one of the wettest May and Junes I've ever experienced. Absolutely vile. Well, not vile, but just grim and grey, and it's still trying its best to be grim and grey right now. Okay, so here's our new unit, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to shove on these little shrink wrap bits straight here, and then we're going to go white to the hot lug baby. To get my helping hands hopefully help. It's never in the right place, is it? Can we please have some whatever? Helping hands. Hold it there. Let's come in from this side. Yes, so it's been that kind of early summer, not the greatest, but we're supposed to be in for some warm days right now for a few days, so that's fine, and I'm hoping to use one of them to do some spraying as well. So that's for Rohit's Parts Caster, which I already had a go at doing the colour spray on that guitar, but I didn't like it. It was a kind of started off looking for a sunburst, but actually it became too quite a lot too dark, so I've taken that all off, and so I'm now going to do it more like a honey burst colour this week, hopefully. Hoping the humidity stays good on Wednesday, which is what I'm supposed to be doing. Okay, if I'm thinking normally, I probably would have done this a different way around. I probably would have put the socket in the cup first. That's probably how I normally do it. I think I'm just losing my grip on reality. So we have a couple of these thingies here to just strengthen that joint, and then we'll get the heat gun. And that's that. So the trick with this, of course, is to make sure that this, when fitted, all fits and works with this plug, the socket going in. So I always forget this when you put a socket together like this. I always forget which way up the hot arm lug thing has to go, which is really crazy because it's not that difficult to remember. But guess what? I can never remember it. Now, do I have a thing that works on this? It's never quite wide enough, so I don't think this will work. This one, no, it sure won't. And I don't think my box spanner will work on that either. No, that can't work because that's for tuners. This is much too big for that. Yep. So I will do it the boring way by hand. What I will do once I've tested it, when I'm happy that it fits and that we can get a jack plug in there without any problems. Please go in there. Just bite the thread, would you please? Bite the thread. This is probably why I would have done this the other way around first. Put this in and then do the nut. Oh, I've become completely, what's the word, klutzified. Yeah, so we'll put this in, test the socket, and if necessary, if this routing is a bit too small, then what I will do is I will put in, or maybe if we have to, put a little bit of a cut scoop in the back just to create some space. But hopefully we won't need that, so just bear with me. So we get the thingy there, we line it up and we go, how are you doing? Is it kind of, that's sort of tight. Let's screw it in place first. There's no reason why not to be absolutely sure. There we go. It's quite difficult to get the wires out of the way. I feel very klutzy today. I really do. I'm not handling small things brilliantly well. Had an interesting email this morning from Kenny up in Oban in Scotland, and Kenny has an old customer and friend of Relove Guitars who I did a sort of refurb job on an old Les Paul of his many years ago, and I think not long after that, or maybe before, I don't know, but Kenny got into doing refurbs and setups on his own. There we go. Blimey. It's a nice fit, but it doesn't want to come out. Right, that fits. So what I'm going to do, bizarrely, is I'm going to now take it out again, not that you can see very well, and I'm going to put a little bit of Loctite on it so it doesn't go anywhere. That's a mild Loctite. So it seems like a bit counterproductive because I'm going to go all the way back. Well, actually I'm not. I'm going to go part the way back and drop a little bit in the way of the threads. Yeah, so Kenny sent me a message pointing me out to a video, which to my surprise, I was taking my wife down to the to a doctor's appointment this morning, and so she went in, and I sat outside reading this, looking at this video, YouTube video, and oh, thanks. And yeah, it featured yours truly, and it made reference to Sam Deeks' banana and a picture of a truss rod against a computer-generated background. Anyway, so my interest was definitely piqued. I didn't recognise the channel, so I went and had a look, and it was a guy in the States who was into guitar fixing upping. I think he's called The Next Project, and anyway, somebody who'd kind of followed my stuff for a bit put him on to my channel and said, look at how this guy levels frets, and so he went and had a look, and then did a very, I think, a really accurate summary of how I do it, or the way I level frets, and the way I use what I call the banana, which, as you know, is, inverted commas, just a truss rod that I use to make to bend a curved fret leveling tool, which I tune to the curvature of the neck with the guitar with the strings on. Anyway, so it was just interesting to see. I don't look out on Google and whatnot for references to myself, partly because I don't really care in terms of ego things anymore. I'm too old to really, I don't need strokes. I don't need to go and find good or bad things said about me. It's just not. I don't find it rewarding or important, which is why I don't make cute videos to try and entertain people either. Anyway, so there you go. That's that done. Off with the soldering iron. Away with the solder things. So yeah, I had a kind of good look at this, and it was a nice description of how I work, and it was a very open-minded summary, and the guy was kind of encouraging people to have a go. I'm going to throw this away because I'm not going to recommend reusing a dead so-called Fender brand socket, which is no good. So that can go away. Yeah, anyway, rabbit. So yeah, it was just a kind of slightly funny thing of seeing yourself talked about. And one of the things I really wanted to make clear, and it was just, I think there was an honest mistake made in somewhere in the account of what I was doing. It just gave an impression for a split second that I'd been sent, or somebody suggested I'd been sent this original tool called the katana to try out, and that I'd copied the method basically. Well, I have copied the method, but not. I bought one, and funnily enough, it's still here somewhere. I don't know where. Does it still live in here? My God, so it does. I bought one, and I couldn't use it because the maker of the tool treated me very badly for all kinds of boring reasons while I was busy complimenting his tool, and so it ended up on the shelf. I would, had he not been very rude and confrontational, I would have used it and carried on recommending it because I'd paid 100 and something quid for it. And anyway, long story was, I said to him that I wasn't happy being shouted at and told what words I could and couldn't use, and it was so unpleasant an experience. I was gobsmacked actually, and one of the maker was clearly having trouble, or clearly stressed about trying to capitalize the tool, which actually, when you consider that really it's a truss rod in a bit of a frame, a bit of an aluminium frame, sexy looking admittedly, but it might be difficult. I don't know. It might be difficult to patent. I don't know, or it might be difficult to protect. That's probably more to the point. Anyway, given the irony of that, it would have been really smart to have treated customers with less kind of manic attempt to control what I said. I praised it, but he, believe it or not, despite me praising it, he didn't like the words I used, and I sort of said, "Come on, I'm a customer. You can't. I'm not your PR department. I don't expect a grovelling thank you, but I really have been, I've been complimenting this thing and recommending it. I think at that time I had about 7,000 supporters, followers, 7,000 or 8,000. I said, look, I've got quite a few followers, and I've been raving about this, and you can probably go and find the old videos on my channel exactly where I first used it. Within about a week of corresponding, it had gone from you shouldn't use this, you mustn't use that word, you can't show it on this way, you showed close-ups of it, and you're helping the Chinese to steal my copyright, and this, that and the other, and it became almost insane. And then I was really bemused as a person who's been in business for quite some time, an older bloke. I really didn't have time for this this kind of stupidness, really. And I said to him, you've done quite an amazing thing. You've managed in about the space of a week to take a passionate advocate, because I absolutely loved the method, and it was, I thought it was a genius way of leveling frets. I said, you managed to take probably your most passionate advocate and turn me into basically an enemy in the space of a week, and I'm not going to use your tool and promote it. I mean, it's too much grief. And I said, can I just, I've been in business for years, can I just gently recommend that you don't do customer service that way? At which point, I don't treat your customers that way, I think I said. And at the point I mentioned customers, he refunded me the 150 quid or whatever the unit cost. I didn't ask for it, but it left me kind of with a problem, and the problem was simply that once I'd leveled that way, I wasn't going to do it any other way. I thought it was a brilliant process. So I had a problem. I absolutely wasn't going to use that man's tool, excuse the expression, in my videos and in any way promote it, having been, you know, I just thought, no, yeah, no way I'm going to be showing this every week. And, you know, as my subscribers grow, maybe over time, you know, more and more people come and buy your thing. It's not going to happen. So, so in the end, what I did was I just thought, well, I've got to use this method. So I basically set about, you know, improvising my own using a leftover old truss rod, and you know, it doesn't have the elegance of the paid-for unit, but to my not really that much surprise, actually, I discovered that it functioned brilliantly well. So I was pleased that I could carry on doing the leveling the way I you know, had come to believe was a really good way to do it. And I put the original tool on the shelf and left it there. You know, there was even a part of me that thought, why don't I just sell it, and you know, I get double my money back. That would be artistic revenge. And then I thought, no, I don't want to do that. It doesn't feel good. So what I did was I just I was lining up to write an ebook, you know, showing how I leveled or how I set guitars up, and mainly focusing on setup with very inexpensive tools that you could either make yourself or you could get, you know, bog standard tools. And so I chose to then end up doing featuring how to make and use the truss rod leveling beam in that ebook. And in a way there was a sort of an artistic revenge in that, because it sold in the last few years thousands of copies, and thousands of people used that technique who maybe otherwise would have, I don't know, I would have recommended them to go and buy the katana. So to me it seemed a fair thing, really, that, you know, if I'd ever treated anybody that badly, I think I would have deserved to what am I looking for? I would have deserved to have lost business, you know. And I just think, well, I'm going to go ahead and carry on using this. And in the 8 or so years I've been using it, I've kind of developed it a little bit in, you know, learning more about how it works and what it can do. And in some ways I feel like I've learned far more because I've done it by, you know, improvising, than if I'd have carried on using the paid tool. So it's been a very productive thing. And yeah, that's what was featured in the YouTube review today. So it's quite interesting to see. But that it's very difficult, and I explained it in a comment. I don't like going over the history of it, because actually it was, believe it or not, and maybe you will believe it if you're a nice, decent person who hates conflict, I was very hurt by that experience. It's my nature to be hugely positive about people's things. If I find something that somebody's doing good, I love to celebrate it and crow about it and boost them up. And I felt really depressed at being treated so unkindly, you know. And it wasn't that I expected thanks, but I didn't expect to be kind of abused and threatened. I think it was a threat of put my solicitors onto you or something, to have your videos. It was threats to have my videos taken off YouTube. You know, I mean, it's kind of nuts, really. So yeah, I didn't like that at all. So it left me feeling really depressed about it, and you know. But I suppose that, you know, in the long run, I made good on it, and you know, it's been productive for me in the long run over the years. But like I say, it's very difficult to explain to people why I use this thing, why it's called the banana at all. I mean, it's a silly name, of course, but there's an issue. Why do I call it that? And then, you know, I've never taken credit for the method. I've always said the method came from a tool that I bought called such and such, and then of course the problem with that is that then I have to explain why I don't use that tool, you know, because it doesn't make any sense that I was impressed by this tool and this method, so why don't I use it? And there's obviously, as you heard, there's a reason, a good reason why I don't use it, but I can't really make sense of that without telling the story, and so I feel like I've got to explain, or you know, when people ask about it, I can't really tell only a part of it, and I have to sort of check in, morally, ethically check in with myself, so I don't feel unkind, or I'm trying not to be unfair in any way. So I try to report, you know, primarily what it felt like and my expectations of having bought this thing, being able to use it and praise it freely without being ordered around like I was somebody's paid PR department, which seemed completely nuts to me. I mean, it just took me totally by surprise. And you know, in hindsight, this is me being a bit sort of maybe analytical, over analytical, but in hindsight, I suspect that the guy was having quite, I mean, I could tell from his emails, he was having a lot of trouble, you know, protecting his invention, and you know, it was clearly a source of stress to him, and you know, I think what he did, unfortunately, is he brought that all to me and kind of made it, took it out on me actually, and I think that's really unfair, and you know, I didn't deserve to be dealt with that way actually. You know, your frustrations, my frustrations about life in general are my issue. It's not for me to take it out on you when you come send your guitar to me, or you know, call me or whatever. I'm not going to make you feel like a bag of crap because I'm struggling to make my world work or something. So that was my basic umbrage about the whole thing, and but yeah, like I say, it's very difficult to discuss why I set out doing it this way, but particularly why I didn't end up continuing to use that tool, which ironically, of course, had the person been polite and not set out on this crazy sort of screeching control thing, had he been nice about it, I'd already spent the money. I was going to just carry on and happily use it and recommend it, and now I'd be recommending it to 20,000 subscribers or whatever it is, you know, nearly. But I don't recommend it because if you're probably, I have said it many times, it's probably, if you're just a buyer and a user, it's probably absolutely fine, and you could still read my ebook and learn lots of stuff about how to use that tool, since I've written about how to use that kind of method. But I don't recommend it because if you have anything to do with a YouTube channel, or you say anything about it in a public arena, which is my mistake of course, I don't think you'd want to get into the situation I found myself in. It was really unpleasant, so that's why I don't recommend it, and hence I carry on using my own tool, excuse the expression, and that's it, my banana tool, which is all prompted by having that discussed today in the on somebody's YouTube video. Anyway, that's that. But so if you're somebody who may have come along from that channel, welcome, and amongst a few other little tweaks, this is what I'm basically setting out to do with this Made in Mexico Strat. Now, Made in Mexico Strats are generally pretty good instruments, but in the case of this one, a few little things to take care of. See if I can I zoom out a bit further? No, that's it. So what I'm doing is I change the nut. I'm going to fine tune the first fret action later. Because it's a curved bass, I find it quite hard to take that down from the bottom, so I will use nut slot files. Where I can, I prefer to cut away from the bottom using you know, sanding from underneath. But with a curved bass, it's a lot of hard work, unless it's very, very far off, in which case I will. So back to this guitar. So Kev, what I'm doing with this is I'm changing the nut, because the thing that guitarists of our age want more than anything else, or appreciate more than anything else actually in practice, is a guitar that plays in tune and stays in tune. And the nut has a huge part in it. It's what I call 50% of the equation, of the tuning stability equation. And I could even do it, look, as a yin and yang, something like that. I don't know how you do yin and yang. So I'm going to go nut, and I'm going to go slack in the strings. So you can't see that from there, but that's my, remember it this way. Sorry. The equation of tuning stability. 50% your nut, 50% the slack in your strings. And when I pick up this dropped thing, the important thing is you've got to get both of those right. If you get the nut part right, but you've still got slack in your strings, it will go out of tune forever. If you get the slack stretched out the strings, but you don't get the nut right, the nut will keep putting out of tune forever, even when the strings are fully stretched. And so you'll notice that the one thing I'm not saying it has to do with is the tuning machines. They have practically nothing to do with it. So these are the original strings. They've been slacked off and pulled back on, but you'll notice straight away when I pull them, there's a lot of slack. So you have to pull it right out. And I'll do that at the end when I put new strings on. So what I've done is I've changed the nut because I want tusk, the best material I've found for smooth running slots and low friction. I'm going to stretch out the strings at the end thoroughly so that they don't detune no matter how much I pull them. That means you can use the tremolo without it going out of tune. Get that two-part, the yin and yang of tuning stability right. Okay. And in the meantime, what I notice now when I've set this at a low action, we've got choke outs. So I'm saying from 13 upwards, I'm just going to make a note of that, high E 13 upwards, we've got bends choking straight out, high E upwards, high E 13 and up, bends are choking out. Now, what have I set the action to? I set it to about 1.25 millimeters on the high E last fret, and I use the last fret for personal reasons. And if you don't like the last fret, fine, use the 12th. It's no problem. I just do it the way that suits me. But what I mean is, I know that a 1.5 millimeter action on a guitar like this, a 9.5 inch radius, should play, and it should bend. And the reason it's not bending will be a combination of uneven frets, but also a slight bit of bend or hills and valleys in the neck, shall we say. Now I'm just going to, before I do any more, I'm going to check the neck relief, and I do that by holding down the first string, the low E string on the first and last frets. You can put a capo on there on the first if it's easier, but then I touch down, press the string down in the middle to see the gap between that and the fret, about the 8th fret or 9th. 7th here in this case actually, 7th fret here, and I can see there's quite a big gap. Now that's bigger than I should by rights need. So with a Fender like so, this should, I can never remember with the made in Mexico's, but it should allow me to make a little truss rod adjustment. Is that too much? I think it is too big. They're too small, sorry. And I've got one up here that says Mexico. It's probably a lie, and that's a Martin one. I keep a Mexico one around. I keep one in here for starters, but it's not very easy to turn. So, in which case, yeah, it is the Mexico one, but I can't get a bite on it because, stupidly, I need to order another one for damped. Now I did hand carve one the other day, which I wouldn't want to use on here. I used it for something else, but I don't want to use it in this guitar. So that's interesting. Let's see if we've got the original in here, and sadly we don't. So I may have to hold. I have to get one of those. It's a 475 mil, which is an equivalent. It's an imperial equivalent. Yeah, 470. 470. I've got to order one of those. I may have to do this adjustment last thing. 4.70 imperial hex key. Bugger. I could probably do it once I take the strings off with this one. I just have to put a little plier on the end of it, but it doesn't make it. It's a bit too much really for now, but it's not a problem for doing the leveling. So I'll leave that as is until I have the strings off. So leaving that to one side. But important thing, Kev, is to be. We need to, if you haven't got one, we need to get you the original or the right size thing for this, because once you have a low action, particularly if you have a low action, the guitar is susceptible to changes due to humidity, warmth, temperature, and so on. And because the action is set low to begin with, it just means that as soon as it changes, and the neck changes a tiny bit, like goes flatter by a tiny amount, suddenly you'll get buzz, and usually it'll be in the first half of the neck. And then to correct that, you'll need to be confident to do a small adjustment on the truss rod, which I'll do somewhere in this video once we've got the strings off. And so in this case, I know I need to flatten it, so I'm going to turn it slightly clockwise to flatten it, but I need to do it with the strings out of the way so I can get that remains of that. This one, which I actually use for my truss rod adjustments, see here, I need to use it in there. Okay, so let's pretend I've got my relief the way I want it, and I've got my action down here where I want it, and let's pretend I've got the action where I want it at the first fret. It's less critical. Now what I know I need to do is to precision level this neck under load with the strings on, as seen here, because to do that will now, this is the only way I can free up any buzzes and chokes, and the ones I already know about are bends on the high E. Now, like I say, on a 9.5 inch radius Strat neck, you should be able to have a 1.2-ish millimeter last fret action on the high E without it choking out. And the choking out has a combination to do with combined things. It's partly to do with the lowness of the high E string, but it's compounded by any unevennesses in the what I call the G track, where you bend the string into, or the B track, where you bend the string. And if there's any hills and valleys getting in the way, they can very quickly take away any clearance you had, and that becomes more truer the lower the action you have. So these interrelated things kind of play off each other much more the lower you go, and that's why, you know, for some people on their first guitars or whatever, everyone's happy or satisfied with a tall action because it hides all the bad things. So here's my my leveling beam, and it's been tuned now to approximate, because I used 3 sample points. This is an uneven, unequal, bumpy curve, an imperfect curve. This, having taken 3 sample points, I've basically copied the curve, but because I've used only 3 sample points and this thing bends in a fairly straight, regular linear fashion, I've actually ended up creating a facsimile of that real curve in a much more smooth form. So this is what I call an ideal curve coming down on top of an imperfect curve. And the first thing I do is got 400 grit paper, self-adhesive paper stuck to it. And as I work this on the what I call the E track, where the E string sits, and a little bit side to side, and I kind of tend to go about 1.5 inches backwards and forwards, if that. But what's interesting is as I kind of press this down onto the fingerboard and go from side to side, the first thing it will sort of show me is where we have any problems at all. So I can tell, it's hard for you to see this, but I can tell you we've got slightly low first, okay, slightly high 4th fret on the edge actually, a low one on the edge on the 5th, but so that's really interesting. Right on the edge that one's high, right on the edge that one's low, and then the two of them together are about the same height in from the edge. That one's okay, cutting normally, that one's a bit low, that one's a bit high, that one's a bit high at the edge, bit high at the edge, low at the edge, low at the edge, okay-ish, high at the edge, okay, low at the edge, low at the edge. So far, I would say there's a low spot there, which is funny because isn't that the 13th fret? So here's something we noticed, that when we start our bends in a ditch, in a valley, I call it, that often means any tiny unevenness here chokes out the note, because we're starting from a ditch. So having done that, having 10 years or 9 years of using this method, I'm very able to make a quick judgment of the neck as a result of that first fret level, or the leveling of the E track. I tend to sort of dust it out of the way, and what I'm interested in first, and all the time of course, is do the regular notes play well? Yes. Now if I were to bend from the 13th, we know it's going to choke out, and we know it's going to choke out around about here on the, so we're bending from the 13th to 14th fret. Okay, so we know that 14th fret in the G track, as I call it, so let's just make a note of that. G track, 14th, we expect to see that needing to be taken down, because that's getting in the way of this bend. So for an ideal action on here, we want this whole lot to play at the chosen action, which I rate from 1.25 across to 1.5. Play at the chosen action, all notes to play and all bends to play. And the notes it's only if the frets are really seriously uneven that the notes seem not to play. It's most of the unevenness is experienced by the high E bends choking out. That's where you see the effects of the fret unevenness. Now there is an extra dimension to this leveling process, which is, I kind of keep hoping to write an ebook about this, but an even more subtle bit, and that is the thing. In fact, the channel owner, is it John? Oh God, I've forgotten. I saw his name mentioned, but I think it's John of the next project. Noticed some what he called sort of slap when he hit the strings hard there, and the banana fret leveling method actually helps you to clear that up too. Okay, so now we're going to come on to the G track, and it's on the G track we're going to see how effective this leveling process is, because the G track is the one that we're going to hopefully now clear those obstructions. Now, to have confidence in this, you've got to be, like in my case, have several years of experience using it, because that's how I know that a Mexican Fender 9.5 inch radius neck and the actions I've chosen here should play with all the bends. as well at that chosen action. If it doesn't, I know from experience that the leveling will just clear up the unevenness that's preventing that. But of course, if you don't have the experience, you don't know that, and you have to sort of go by, suck it and see and find out. So what I'm aiming to do here is I'm aiming to kind of give the G track a nice bit of treatment. I can see that there's still a low spot here. It's not massive. There's a low one. The last fret is low, but the only low spot that's causing us anything at all is just after the 12th fret, which I told you at the beginning because I could tell, because the high E was choking on the bends at the 13th. So the great thing about this banana method is that it confirms suspicions, your diagnosis. See that? Almost. So let's just see where it's choking out still. Okay, we're halfway between the G and the D. So I'm going to do a little bit more on the G and then we'll go across to the D. Now before the G, you might have seen that I recalibrated the rod to make sure that on this side of the neck radius that we were still working to the same relief curve, which is two curves at right angles to each other if you think about it. So I'm kind of redoing a bit more here, and I'm sort of focusing a little bit more on this top end. When I say focusing, the truth is I'm pressing a little bit down at that top end because I know I want to even that out. And truthfully, at this end of things, it's where the tiny bit of fret unevenness will, at a low action, prevent us from bending notes. Of course you can change that by a tiny increase in the action. Right, let's do the D and see what happens. So I'm going to recalibrate for the D. So yeah, the good thing about this particular truss rod, or the U channel as it's called, I find is that because it's a little bit stiffer, I find it does quite a good job in holding its shape, and that becomes kind of important when I get down to the bass string end of things, because the bass strings, they seem to be really susceptible to these peaks or hills and valleys, and their hills tend to get in the way of the bass strings spinning, because they spin more, obviously, because they're wound and fatter. So it's an interesting thing that I do the same technique when I get over to the side, but I change my thinking. So as I get into the wound strings now with the D, I'm thinking about the fret leveling as before, so I'm using it in the same way. But if anything, I'm now almost trying to lighten my touch and concentrate on repetition more, because what I want to do is I want to map this idealized curve onto the hills and valleys, well, really the hills, but I'm trying to map this curve onto the hills that exist in this on this fingerboard. And the hills, by the way, are created not by the frets being put in wrong or badly or anything. They're created, as far as I can learn through experience, by the way the wood responds to compression, and each one is different. A little bit at that end, believe it or not. Make sure it's not touching anything. I'll just double check the height of the action down here. Well, that's barely above 1 actually. Let's just double check it. Yeah, that's possibly what we're on the D. It's possibly a tiny fraction too low anyway, but I mean we're talking minuscule amounts now anyway, so very hard to know. So we're still choking on the outside of the G. Let's double check these heights again just to make sure. So we got 1.2, 1.25. That's 1.25 according to that. So I'm doing a mixture of measuring and eyeballing here, because sometimes I find it easier to follow the curve across. In fact, I think I can see the E is down further. There we are. Let's tune it up again. So the only tricky area in this whole neck are the bends on the G, on the high E across into that G. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to concentrate a little bit more on this top end here to make sure that we can free up these bends on the high E for this action chosen, because it certainly should play. So it's choking out on the G right at the 14th, only a tiny bit, so we're going to give that little bit more attention there. And the great thing about the action is if you can't get it, if there's something just will not do, then the tiniest adjustment on the height that you would not notice even in terms of your fingers playing it, you can just raise it that tiny bit and it will clear it. So that the smallest amounts, when you're dealing with low actions, the smallest adjustments make the biggest difference. So I have a sort of experience-based point where I say, okay, the effect of the low frets at 13 and 14, or the ditch, I should say, the valley, are such that I'm not going to chase it any further in terms of fret metal. I'm going to call it quits, and now I'm going to just complete worrying about the fret slap, which is that other kind of buzz. My definition really is only it's a distinction that I made because it seemed useful to me to think about this buzz caused by individual frets that stand up and get in the way, and then there is what I call fret slap, which I found tends to be the effect of individual peaks, the tops of the hills, being in the way of spinning spinning strings, particularly the thicker strings. And so that still is solved or alleviated by the same technique. So we take this more ideal, more perfect curve, and we try and just bring it, impose it gently onto the less perfect neck. And the idea here is trying to use repetition rather than downward force, because this is ideally you want it to keep its shape as much as it can, and the idea being to gently sort of ease off the hill peak that's getting in the way. So that's what I'm aiming to do here. And I can see where it's kicking up some stuff, but it's got quite a bit kicking up around about the 9th fret and the 13th, 12th, 13th. So again, same principle to play. A little bit of what I call sizzle at the top there, so what I'm going to do is just to go back with the tool, and I'm going to just stay at that top end, and I tend to do this weird thing where I turn the beam round. Why? Just in case it's slightly different in both directions, give it a sort of an even going over. So I'm basically just looking at leveling out a bit more on these last few frets so that I can have the action I want and as little possible slap or fret buzz. I'm going to find nosy. Going to do the calibration now again for the final track, the low E track. Use the same position each time, same place on the fingerboard. Okay, that's a little bit over radius now. Sorry, over relieved. A bit under, weirdly. I've reshaped this recently, and I've been using it in its kind of standard form for the whole of its life. And then, in other words, it started off as being slightly concave X, if you look at from that end. And I wanted it to start flat, so I've made it flat by default with a little bit of grinding, sanding, and now it actually takes much more direct positive adjustment to get the curve I want into it, which feels a bit odd because it's not how I'm used to it. I'm used to it just only putting the tiniest bit on because it's already started out curved, if you get my meaning. But it's fine. I actually prefer it being more positive because it keeps it under tension a bit better. So here's the low E track, and again, I'm really not expecting any notes, individual choked notes or high frets. I'm really thinking about fret slap again for the spinny fat string that has, you know, the wound characteristic, and which spins more when you strike it. Okay, so there's quite a lot coming off the last stretch there, and there's a gap there, as we know, a bit of a low spot still showing up there, but quite a lot of leveling right at the top. Now, some people ask about things like fall away, and they say, how do you deal with fall away with this method? The answer is I don't. That's it. Don't. The tool seems to do it, and that's what it's doing there. Not putting fall away. It's just trimming back. Well, I suppose it is fall away. It's trimming back as part of this is curve. It's snicking off the high points on those last frets, and that it may be that they're higher because their truss rod isn't affecting them. So you can hear that we've got all the notes. You can hear it still trying to go zzz as we go across. And for that reason I might do one tiny bit more, the tiniest bit more in the G track before calling it quits, because I can sense where it is and I am looking to just free up those bends. That's what we really want. And that's all I'm going to do. That's instinct tells me that's all I want to do. So clean off the stuff up there, put that back on the big magnet that grabs it reassuringly, and then take off the dust from there. Keep that out because I'm going to need that for a small adjustment. Take that off. That's used. Right, now what I'm going to do is take the strings off using the electronic device. Wait a minute, hold on. Before I do that, let me use these strings as I do the nut. Let's just make sure everything's nice and in place. Slightly out of sequence in a way, but it's about taking advantage of what I can when I can. Right, so with the nut, on this curved bottom business, I would prefer to, I keep dropping these spare strings. I prefer to take it down at the slots rather than trying to do it from underneath. It would just take forever on a standing thingy. So we have to, all I care about is really what's the difference in height here. So I have my metric thing, which is I like a 0.3 of a millimeter action over here. Let's give it a bit more of a close up while we're at it. There we are, something like that. Mustn't forget that it's zoomed in. Okay, so I think that's close enough to go. We're going to go in reverse order, so we sort of start with the G, which is a 17. Now the idea is to get this to cut backwards as well as downwards, and we brush it. So this is a very, very delicate operation. It's very easy to overcut. So what do I want? One of these. Just going to sort of clear the grooves of that thing file, so it gets as clean a cut as possible. And we're on the mark there. That'll do. And we move to the B, or the blue one I should say. And then we cut into that one. They're all cut at slightly different rates, so it's quite easy to overdo it or get it wrong. It's very nearly there. Tiniest bit more. And if you overdo it, it's a pain because you've cost yourself a new nut or some boostering, which you don't want to do. So I'm trying to do it as delicately as possible. Now, an interesting thing happens is, I'm going to call that quits. Occasionally, as you're doing this, to get the angle right, you touch the wood behind it, and that's dependent on how far behind the nut Fender or whoever puts the shelf of wood, because you have to be tilted back to get the right launch point on the string off the nut, and you have to get it, and you can't afford not to get it, so you have to cut backwards at a meaningful angle, and sometimes you will just clip the top of it to get that angle, and I blame Fender for putting the wood too far. They do it so that it holds the slot and it's strong-ish, but it's a pain because it will sometimes just touch the wood as you're trying to cut back to the angle. You can't kind of keep it shorter. You know, there's no real sort of way around it. You will get kind of, it will nick the top of it, only slightly. But I wouldn't be too critical when you see it happen on someone's guitar. It's easy to have a go and say the luthier is terrible, but actually what the luthier is probably trying to ensure is that there's a backward pitch to the slot, especially on the things like the G and the D. So now we're changing over to this one, the 26 in this set. Check each time to make sure we've got the right one. Still see fresh air in there. 26. Because the temptation is to tilt the thing in the opposite way to cut on the height. That's just on the mark, that is. Yeah, temptation is to cut this way, and then you get quicker through the material, but that's going to leave you with potentially a flat slot, which you don't want. Okay, 36 on this one. Thirty-six. That's on the mark from my liking, that's good. And now to the 46. The 46. People often ask, how big can I go with the slots before they become too wide? And that's probably one of your least ever worries. You can eventually get a slot that's too wide, but if it's cut with a decent tool, even when it's too wide, the string will still sit comfortably in the bottom. When they make commercial nuts, they make them to accommodate a huge range of sizes of strings, gauges, you know, anything from 8 to 13. So if you think about it, you can have a 13 slot and it will play with 8s. I've never myself come across a slot in a nut that were that wouldn't play with an 8 or a 13 gauge. There you go, that's my set done. So now we're at the target action on the first fret, and the only little thing we have to do next, when I take off, well, there's quite a few things to do, but when I take this off, next will be we want to brush up the nut, glue it down, and then I want to do a small adjustment on the truss rod, a tiny bit of tightening. This is, don't get your finger caught between that while you're doing the power tool. Never had that happen before. I was trying to get the other tuner thing out of the way like a fool. Now if I were, and I am interested in doing the right thing for Kev, so what I am going to do is I'm going to fit a Tusk string tree, because if you've got a Tusk nut and you're playing with a tremolo, you'd be better off having a Tusk string tree instead of a Fender metal one. I know they've had them for years, and obviously I keep this with the guitar so it stays original, but this is my recommendation. Replace it with the tusk one. Now this is all the way down to the deck. It doesn't really need to be that steep an angle. I'm not going to say of an angle because that's American, and it's not how British people speak. So here is the original. It's just a cheap little string tree. Here is my replacement tusk. And what I'm going to do is put that over there, and I'm going to slightly widen the the thing, pilot hole. Mine's in your way now, sorry. Okay, that's too narrow. That's not the best one. So I think I may have put the one that I want somewhere else. Let's go with 2. I think I've already done a 2. Let's go with a 2.5 at this set. Just a tiny little bit, just to give it some widening so that it doesn't split the wood. Okay, so we'll leave that there. Spare one goes in the something like 14 quid, 12 to 14 quid, depending on postage, a pair. So they're about 7 quid each when all said and done. So when I use one, I get a spare one to do similar with somebody else's guitar. Okay, so the next bit now, I'm going to take off these strings because they've done their work, and I don't want to be dragging the curly bits through the bridge block. So I'm going to do something else while I'm just here. Let me just check the gauge of the lowest string. While we're at it, sorry, you zoomed in on a nut. Forgive me, I'll come back in a second. Come on, we're on inches, fractions, inches. Yeah. Huh. Okay, that's 42, so that is 9s. Okay, right, sorry, terrible view. Ta-da! I've cut the strings so I can get them out through the back nice and easily. This Made in Mexico has a full weight block, which is really weird because there was a period of time where quite a lot of Made in Mexicos had these very nasty, seemed to me to be quite grotty zinc alloy ones, and these are a marked improvement. Okay, so while I've got access to this, and I may be able to get a bit of a turn on it with a tool, I'm going to use pliers to turn this in the tighter department. There you go. It's not an ideal way, and I've noted on my hand I've got to buy some more of these. Okay, so I've tightened that up to flatten it out slightly. So what I'm now going to do is I'm now going to mark up all the frets again for the crowning part of the process. And this is where I take the frets that have been slightly flattened in the leveling process and recrown them so that they're nice and arch shaped again. Now I'm happy, you won't believe how happy I am that this is in fact a rosewood style or laurel or whatever the stuff they used fingerboard, because if it was a maple one, I've had nothing but trouble with American and Fender USA, Fender Mexico and Fender USA maple necked boards, maple boards. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm sorry. Their finish seems to like to fall off at the drop of a hat, which is not good at all. So thankfully this one is maple and dark wood, and therefore there's no lacquer to fall off, thankfully. So I'm going to recrown all the frets, and you'll see that I probably don't spend hardly any time on most of them, because there's very little to round off. The thing about leveling frets is it always looks like you're doing more than tends to look like you're doing more than you are. But I would put a caveat saying, providing you're starting with something low like 400 grit or 600 grit even, don't stick something like 120 grit on there. And I mean, having said that, that's still, like a soft face cloth compared to some of the files that I used to use. There's great big sort of scraping flat metal files that it'll level your frets, but it will take a lot of material in the process. And I think one of the good things about the banana method is because you stop as soon as you've leveled enough to make the action play that you've chosen, providing of course it's within the realms of possibility, and that's where the experience is required. But because it's got the strings on, you can stop as soon as you've got it playing and you've freed up those bends or those buzzes or whatever it is problems you've got with the fingerboard, with the fretboard I should say. And that, as a result, saves a bit of metal, and I like it for that reason as well. Okay, so we're now coming up onto the low spot where I really don't expect to do hardly any recrowning, because it will have very hardly touched some of the frets. That one's barely touching, so whizzing by. This one, tiny little bit as well. And then a bit on the G track here. So I've got about 7 or 8 jobs stacked up for this week, which is fantastic. The pace of things has been very good this last month, possibly even 2 months. It was busy, then it dropped off a little bit in May, I think it was, because it was so busy in April. And I sort of got most things done in April. But now I've got a busy last week of June, and who knows what July will be like. Okay, so my last fret here. Good. Now I'm going to wipe off the bulk of the dust. We'll take this out and give it a clean, and then I will gently glue it in. So in a way the slots now on here are just a fraction deeper than I would like if it was a flat nut, but because it's a curved one, and because I don't want to struggle for ages with the trying to sand it perfectly from the bottom up, and it's a mechanical challenge really, more than anything else. So I kind of concede defeat, inverted commas, and work with the slots. But that's what they're made for, they're made to be adjusted. That's why they sell fret slotting files, nut files. Anyway, so here I'm just taking off the bulk of the dust and the pen off the side of the frets. Let's kind of get most of it gone, and you see quite a lot comes off, which is just good. And then once I've done the polishing and sanding, I'll do another clean, and then it'll get rid of all the dust as well. So the next bit is boring, so I'm going to disappear for this and do this off camera. It's where I cut up a load of pieces of that stuff, masking tape, and I go over the whole board, masking off the fretboard so that I can sand without damaging the fretboard at all. And then I'll come back once I've done that and I'm ready to put on new strings. And yeah, would be at that sort of stage. So let me switch off, get a drink, watch some brainless TV or something, and back to you in a minute. Right, nut fitted, everything cleaned, frets leveled, polished, leveled, recrowned, sanded and polished out. You can see it all beautifully shiny. Everything sanded and dusted. So now we come to the fitment of the stringments. Fitments of the stringments. When I was a kid, when I was a lad, I remember, I don't know when it was exactly, let me try and guess when it, right, 1978 I'm going to say, and I had been fostered as a kid, and in 1978 I went back to live with my dad, which was educationally and socially and emotionally probably a terrible thing, because I don't think it was good for him. Both my brother and I went back at the most difficult age any teenagers could go back, and my dad didn't really have any experience of parenting, because we'd been fostered all our lives, and bless him, he tried, but it went downhill pretty quickly. But during that time, in that strange few years, one of the things I got from him was access to his records, shall we say, and I got to play a couple of records endlessly. And I was not an eclectic child in that I didn't have any record collection. I just had what was there. Most of his stuff was pretty cheesy 70s, or what I thought at the time, cheesy jazz standards. Ronnie Peterson? No, was he with the racing driver? Who's the pianist? Jazz pianist? Thingy. Scott Joplin. No, Scott Peterson. Ronnie Peterson. No, Ronnie Peterson was the driver, wasn't he? Yeah. Anyway, Oscar Peterson. My God, what a stupid person. Anyway, so sorry, Dad. Anywho, so he had all the jazz classics and a ton of what's her name, Ella Fitzgerald, who I never really listened to any of that stuff of his, because it just seemed all old-fashioned-y, and but I obviously I've since come to realise what greats they were, and so on and so forth. But anyway, so I'm going to try and mix telling stories in with doing this. So Kev, when you string this guitar up next time, pull the string all the way through. Make sure the ball is up inside the block at the back, and then what I tend to do is grab it, hold it over the first fret, and pull it back 1 fret's worth and hold on to it. And then I grab hold of my winder, and I hold this bit, the held bit, and I bring it up over the loose bit as it comes round. And then as it comes round, keeping it all taut so it doesn't drop down the ball back in the thing at the other end, I send the held one underneath the loose one this time round, and then drop it in its slot. And then you have this bit that you can cut off, and you've got exactly the same amount around you've got one above the cut off bit and one below it, and it's a sort of the same amount all the time, and it's really predictable, so it's pretty good. So I'll do it one more time and carry on with my story of records. So get the right string first of all. That's the wrong string. Get the right string. It's the right string. That's a stringy. Get rid of the other ones. Pull it up into the block. Make sure it's there. Pull it taut. Hold it at the first fret. Back 1 fret. Wind it on. Hold it taut. Over the top. As it comes around, push the held one under. Let it go under, and then lock it down. And lo and behold, there's your excess to cut off. Anyway, the story was, so I didn't listen to my dad's jazz stuff, but what I did listen to, the only thing he had that I listened to, I think, was the Beatles, and he had Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album. And so I think I pretty much kidnapped that in about 1978 and took it to my room or I shared a room with my brother, and I think I probably commandeered the stereogram, that big brown wooden horrible thing. Anyway, that became, I must have listened to that. I can't actually ever, right now I can't bring to mind any moment of listening to it, but before long I knew those songs inside out. You know, every nuance, every sonic utterance, every melody, every note I knew, and it just became sort of second nature. And around that time I fell in with a kid at school. It actually turned out to be quite a bullying swine and made my life a misery before too long, but at the time I was needing someone to validate me or something, and I hung around with this kid, and he was obsessed with the Beatles, and it was as if he was living back in the Beatle days. That he'd dress like John Lennon, wear a cap like John Lennon, and you know he was from Coventry, but I think he had he put on the attitude of a Scouser like John Lennon, and was a tough little nut like John Lennon. Anyway, but together we used to listen to a load of Beatles at his place, and I enjoyed becoming a bit of a Beatles maniac alongside him. Unfortunately that didn't last too long, but I got out of it the love of the Beatles, which grew on me, and I became kind of obsessed and just hooked on them after that. And I was conscious that it was I was 10 years late or 15 years late. Well, I was a kid when they were first, when they first made it. I was being born, and then for their height of their career I was just a kid. But so in the late 80s, I was this strange creature who was not really up on any crest of any movement. I was very uncool because I liked the Beatles and various odd things that just didn't put me in any sort of neat genre where everyone else was in, some sort of kind of cool style type of thing. I was just out of it, shall we say. But hey, but that's where my love of the Beatles started, and it's never gone away. And I think I knew that my dad, although he didn't have a lot of Beatles, I think it was just Sgt. Pepper, maybe a single or two. But I knew that he appreciated the Beatles' songwriting and their use of melody, and I knew that he could pick out. I mean, he used to play piano in a jazz trio for diners, so he could pick out a tune on his Joanna. But we didn't have a piano at home. That was weird. But anyway, that's where my Beatles love started. But I think I didn't just love their music. I got totally into everything about their, I became, it's like I almost experienced Beatlemania 10 years late, and I was completely besotted with, the black and white version of their rise to fame. And I still am to this day. Really, I still think. I know it was difficult, and it was drug fueled, and it was dirty and stinky and rough, and they weren't exactly the brightest kids on the block, and they were a bit cruel and a bit destructive, and they didn't treat people great all the time. All the human things, but I'm still have that kind of hankering for that black and white 60s that I didn't quite live in as a person. But so for me, the greatest thing that really happened was that they released all that anthology. Well, I've never really listened to the anthology that much, but I really love the fact that they found the original Star tapes, Star Club tapes and stuff, you know, in from Hamburg, and that they released, have made those available, because I find they're some of the most incredible rock and roll Beatles performances. I mean, almost the best there is. To me, it's more dynamic and more alive than any Beatles album, you know. Although, of course, those 3-minute, 2.5-minute songs were also wonderful in their own way. But to hear a sort of, I don't know, hour and 3/4 or 2 hours set or something in 1962 or something, as it was happening in Germany, you know, in Hamburg, is quite something that somebody captured that in that moment in time. So Kev, what you're seeing here is what it takes to stretch out the slack. Now I'm just going to check what we got. Yeah, that's good. We're taking the relief down a tiny little bit, which is fine. It feels very low action. And so what I'm going to do is do some more pulling. Now this time I'm going to do some yanks in this direction. Of course, once you've done it, you then just play until your strings get so dirty you need to change them. But it's this attention to stretching and the nut, those two things will give you the tuning stability you need. So even though that friend at school memory is an unpleasant one in some ways, because I felt like he turned against me and was very cruel and kind of ganged up on me with some other kids, but apart from that, I still am grateful that he and I enjoyed a sort of kind of bit of Beatles fandom together. You know, there was nobody else I could have relived that with other than him at that school. We had some friends. I kind of had a bunch of friends who also loved the Beatles, but not quite in the same obsessive way as he did. So it was a nice kind of obsessive thing to share. Okay, so now all we have a couple of things to do. We're going to check the intonation, and then we're going to set the tremolo to down only in this case. So let me get the, wherever it's gone, this thing, jack plug. We'll need to plug in to the tuner. So Kev, just to talk about the intonation part of it. Intonation is a physical distance based thing, and so what we aim to do is every string on the neck of every guitar has to have its own unique length, and instead of measuring it, which is kind of a difficult thing to do, we achieve those different string lengths by moving the individual saddles backwards and forwards. So the way we do it is we play the open note, or let's say the pinged harmonic of the 12th, which is now nicely in tune, and then we fret the 12th. With a standard fretting, we don't want to squeeze too hard because we can put it sharp, but how you'd normally do it. If it's sharp, as it's showing here, it means this overall length for this string to play in tune on all the notes on here, all the fret positions on here, it means this length is too short, so we have to take it back a little bit. We'll do the B and just confirm B is in tune. B's kind of just about in the right position, which is interesting because that doesn't look like it should be the case. So we're going to say we're going to pull the E back a little bit, which will bring it sharp, so we need to there we go. Okay, slightly sharp as well. So we go back with this one too. Now I'm going to slack off the other ones for a minute because I've got to take all of these back now because I can see they're all slightly out of place. So there's a really simple pattern based thing going on here with your intonation. When you have 3 wound and 3 plain strings, what you expect to find, just to get in focus, you expect to find a staggered pattern of two groups of 3. This tends to be the shortest playing length of all the strings. The saddle then steps back on the B a little bit by about 1 millimeter and then back on the G, and you can see the G here is far too far forward, and so everything else is too far forward. So what I've done now is I've slacked the strings all off because I don't, you know, it's if I've got a lot of adjusting to do, I don't want to drag them under tension. It's better that you release the tension. So here we go, I've pulled the G back to where it should be. Now the D then, in the traditional expected pattern, and it never varies from this by the way, it's always dependable, the D sits slightly forward of the G but not by a whole millimeter, and then the A and the E step back again millimeter at a time each. So you end up with a recognizable group, 2 groups with 3. Forward, back a bit, jump forward a little bit, back a bit, 2 groups of 3. It's the dependable thing. Okay, so put that there where I can see it. Stay in one place, would you? Thank you. There we are, get the light off it. Now these when you slack the strings off, you have to tighten them up again. Stretch them a bit, which I will do with these, the G, the D, the A and the E. Getting in tune now. I'm going to give them all a bit of a final pull just to seat them again, because loosening them off and tightening them up has that effect. And always be careful on the B and the high E, because they are the ones that are likely to break. E, B, G, D, going to sneeze. Pardon me, I'm sorry. Oh dear. Try to cover the microphone, keep you safe. Wow, okay, that's great. So all I want to do now is a small, really, operation, not a complicated one in respect of the tremolo. For a down-only tremolo, we want the tremolo to sit with its plate decked on the back of the guitar body or on the guitar body, but we want to tip it down with the least amount of effort. So what we do is we take out, using the claw screws at the back, we unscrew. I started off by screwing it in so it was firmly tightened, so the plate was on the flat to the guitar body, and we come back outwards so that we've got the smallest possible move to get it to move. I've got a feeling this is touching the, no, it's not. Got a little bit of sticky, sometimes the plate has a sticky touch against the back of the, against the paintwork. So if we get rid of it with a paper thing here, may or may not do it. Yeah, you don't get the sticky. It's nothing you really can do other than put a tiny piece of tape or something under there, but it doesn't matter if it sticks up a little proud, you can just set it there and keep it there. But hear that, it's metal going against the paint. Anyway, so what we want is that's nicely out of tune. Well, that's interesting. So coming back out, I haven't done anything to that. Okay, so we keep going until it starts to lift off, basically, on its own, just under the weight of the strings, and we don't want that because it's then floating. Now, if we wanted it floating, we'd do a different setup to it, but that's nice. I mean, that's not tiniest amount to tip it into downward bend. Now what you don't want is, you want it light as you can, but what you don't want is to bend a note, find it lifting off. So that would mean that if you had a droning note, hear it go down as I bend. So that, I would call that probably a bit too loose. If you don't want any other notes to, any other droning notes to go flat as you bend a high note sharp. So we'll try that again. We can do it by ear. And it's not lifting at the back there, so I think that's okay. So at which point we'll tune it again. See, that's a shame, isn't it? It could probably do with a little piece of soft, what kind of tape? Like or even double-sided tape. That's just, it's kind of like I say, it's a stickiness of the metal touching the. You see, get rid of it. It's not got the. It's got the clunk, which you always get when it slams back down. But it would be fantastic. You don't actually even have to have that. You could have, potentially, you could have a thin piece of something clanging back down on there. Right, obviously that's. Be a much nicer way of doing it, wouldn't it? I wonder if that's going to work better. Now at the moment this is pulling up a bit at the back because this is very, it's a big lump under there, but I wonder, I wonder. See the plate comes down on the wood there, and it makes that clonk. I'm wondering whether is there a better way we could have something in there stopping it clonk. I don't think they'd have to be under pressure, the same as this is. So much nicer without the clonk. I think a bit of double-sided sticky tape without the sticky touching the. I think I know what I mean. I mean, really, a little thin strip of this stuff stuck down on here, underneath there, to stop it would be so much the better. I don't really know how feasible that is. I think it's one of the weakest parts of these Fender tremolos, frankly. Sorry to have to say that. So if we take, for example, we take this cutting surface, and we take this bit of thingy, and we cut that along there, like so. So we get a little thin strip like this. So we could, for example, double-sided tape that onto there, and that would drop down to wherever it wants to drop down to every time, but it would just stop that little clunk, and it would come up and down with the thing. Now there is a bit of give at the back there, so you know, maybe over time it would flatten out, but you could have that and it's got rid of that clonk. I think that's the best solution. I might just attach that, and then careful, you can always take that off. I don't have I do have double-sided tape here. A little bit would help. Problem is, let's see. Give us that back. So we want a little bit of double-sided on the top of this fella here. Only a little bit. We don't want too much. We just want a bit at each end. So no more than this. No more than this. So I'm going to put a little bit there. I need a blade that actually cuts somebody. Something like that. Come on, man. Never does what you want when you ask it to. Holy cow. Just do what you're asked. some reason this sticky tape is great except when you want it to be, and it just doesn't behave. So, and if your blade's too thingy, it then messes up, pulls up all of the sticky stuff, and you don't get any sticky stuff, and the thing you're trying to do doesn't happen. Can you let go of that? Thank you. Let go of this. Thank you. Okay, so let's try this little thing. Bit of sticky tape there. Bit of sticky tape here. Not exactly evenly balanced, but a bit of each end is the principle. What we could do, let's try something. That's not what we want to do, but it was inevitable, wasn't it? Let's get, first of all, let's get this under there like so. Let's get that on there like double so. Look at that. We've got that stuck down there with a little special sticky bit thing. Now, the reason I did that, because then I think I would want to try and see if I can snick off the bit we don't need, the extra bit. But it's not the easiest. Not the easiest shape to cut. So we've got the ruler underneath there, keeping it well and truly safe. We've got to try and go around these screws without running into any problems. Most, and it's a bit messy, isn't it? Not quite got everything I wanted. So there's some tape hanging out which looks a bit naff. I'll just kind of cut that back, something like that. Well, okay, we've got rid of the clonk, and that's sitting almost flat. So I say we get the tuning. Sneaky, easy to take off if it doesn't work out. So I'm going to call that quits for now. Thank you for watching. A little bit of a foam solution to a rattly or a clonky Fender bridge saddle. I just don't like the way they make them. They should all have some sort of pad to, you know, when they come down onto hard wood, it's always going to make a clonk. Anyway, let's just put upon here these of those, and then we should be off home for something to eat. Let's have a look. Yeah, so thank you for watching. Kev, I hope you got something useful out of that. These are the wrong ones. Remember the yin and yang of tuning stability. It's all 50% nut, 50% unreleased slack in your strings. We've done the nut, we've taken care of that, so next, every time you change the strings, your job is to do that thumb and forefinger stretching 3 to 4 to 5 times, or until it no longer goes out of tune when you're doing that stretching. Pretty much stabilizes it. We've changed the socket, checked that it's working, checked that everything's in the right place, leveled the frets, set a much lower action, flattened the neck slightly, so all is good. And you'll note that when I'm putting screws in with a screwdriver on the back like this, I hold the screwdriver with both hands to make sure that the screwdriver doesn't jump off and end up clanking onto the finish, because that can happen. Actually, what can happen is that the screw falls over. It's kind of topples over on its tip, and you get a nasty ding. Okay, there we have it. Thank you for watching. I'm going to stick this on here, like so, with a bit of green tape, and we're away for the day. See you again soon. Kev, thanks for bringing it over. See you when you come and get it. Bye for now.